Hi friends, Andy Lynn here with Align Mold Consulting. I wanted to talk today about obtaining a really clear objective before you hire an inspector or allocate any resources to testing. And I've talked about this topic before in previous videos, talking about an appropriate order of operations, but it's something that's been on my mind this last couple of weeks, and I just wanted to talk about it. So let's get into it. So for the past 3 years, my full-time job is working at a local indoor air quality and mold remediation company. I'm new to the industry. I've been in the industry coming up on 3 years now next month. Being on the front end of things and answering the phone and setting inspections and being that first point of contact has been an incredible opportunity to learn and to gather a lot of information. And so it's been a really good opportunity for me. Don't love answering the phone 40 hours a week, so hopefully I'll be transitioning out of that role soon, but I've learned so much. So I always assume that my boss's competitors are doing what I do because some of these folks have been doing inspections longer than I even knew mold was a thing. But I learned, I've been learning that this is not the case. So when I take a phone call from my boss at his business and people inquire about a mold inspection or indoor air quality testing or mold testing, I ask them really a lot of questions before I make any sort of suggestions. And sometimes this drives people crazy, but I swear I'm well intended, and there's a method to my madness. What I'm trying to do is obtain a very clear objective. Let me explain. So, as we all know, diagnosing your environment is not always a clear, concise process. It's not always simple, and it's certainly not cheap. And so anytime you're going to allocate resources to testing your environment, you want to, again, obtain this objective. So why are you testing? And what is your end goal going to be? So for example, if you own your home and your end goal is to remediate any issues that do persist, your objective in testing or inspecting your home should meet to ascertain two things. Number one, identify source of moisture, both past and present, and two, determine exactly what building material is affected. That seems obvious, but you'd be really surprised what folks will spend money on. And again, I've said this in other videos, people will spend really a lot of their resources collecting data points, like testing, running an ERMI, running another ERMI, running this test, running that test, without, really figuring out what the issue is. So, and I talk about that often, so I don't need to rehash that. But if you're renting your home, your objective changes a lot. And the very good objectives I've seen in testing a rental, sometimes folks are, specifically trying to get out of a lease. And sometimes they're just beginning their mold illness journey, and they're trying to, figure out, is it indeed my environment, and need those data points. Sometimes people just need a data point to get a loved one on board and saying, hey, I'm sick, and here's the proof. So a couple weeks ago, at my full-time job, I talked to a couple that had spent really a lot of money on an inspection by a well-known local inspector. And the inspection was not cheap. He's on the higher end of what folks pay in our area, but he writes a beautiful report. It's extremely comprehensive. So they reached out to me and they said, hey, I hear that you can help, that you can maybe help us get our way out of a lease. We have a new apartment, we've already moved, but we're kind of stuck in this lease. And so I begin the process of asking a lot of questions, and I find out that they've previously had a mold inspection. And so they sent over the report, and I'm very familiar with this professional's reports, and he's great. He uses a number of tools. He works to really inform people, and it was a very long report, and he talked really a lot about ways to increase ventilation, mitigate some of these moisture issues, just, all of these things that would be great for a homeowner. And so his testing methodology looks at particles, which is important, and it's a great methodology. But I couldn't really do anything with it. And it says right in the report too, because there's always got to be a disclaimer like, hey, just because there's particles doesn't always mean that there's mold. So it's, if you're going to use this report in a litigation setting, or, to advocate for yourself, which these folks have done, they've retained an attorney. Not to play the devil's advocate, but like it says right here on page 12, like, this doesn't mean that there's mold. So, and typically what I would do in a situation like that, so had these folks called me first, as I would have, again, ascertained a really clear objective. What do you need? And I would have encouraged them to just pay for a data point. So typically in a situation like this, maybe somebody's had a spore trap air test that identified a water indicator mold in the air, or they did a swab test that identified a water indicator mold. And just to go back and explain this, mold is ubiquitous in nature. We would not be here without it in our ecosystem. I love fungi, if you can't tell. It's not all bad. And so, but there's very specific genera of molds that are very specifically rendered from water damaged material. So mold is characterized by water activity needed to grow on building material. So cladosporium spores are going to tell a very different story than, say, Stachybotrys or Chaetomium. So Stachybotrys and Chaetomium are tertiary molds. That means they are well established. They require really long-term water damage and have the capacity to, render some toxic metabolites. So typically what I'll do with somebody in this situation is say, oh, okay, you had a swab sample that showed Stachybotrys, or an air sample that showed Stachybotrys. And what I can do is I can build, a letter around a very cited document. I cite the heck out of it and explain, this is what it means. This is what it means to see Stachybotrys in an air sample, which doesn't always show up in an air sample, or Stachybotrys on a swab, right? And so what I try to figure out with my boss's clients is, how can we spend the least amount of money? Because I would rather see folks, if you know that the environment is harmful, if there's signs of water damage, if you know that you're getting sick from your environment, move. And yes, sometimes it's necessary to bring in professionals, because some of these landlords or management companies will not let you out of a lease. And so then those are the situations where you have to spend some of your own money to get out of that lease, if it makes financial sense. But spending a couple $1,000s on an inspection that is going to, focus on, giving you information on how to increase ventilation and to remediate, that's not a good objective for a renter. And so I was kind of frustrated by this professional, because I know that he's well intended. I know that he has his own history with these illnesses in his own family, and it's just ask a couple questions. And you want to be versatile. So the company that I work with on my full-time gig, because we're broke, by the way, and this is why I say all these things. I mean, we bought a lemon of a house, and we ran out of money by the time we figured out it was mold. So that is why I became a professional. I became the professional that we couldn't afford but desperately needed. But you should be, asking your clients some questions before selling them something. And the folks that I work with, we're very versatile, and how I might speak to a homeowner is going to be very different than somebody that is renting their home. And my inspectors, the people that I work with at my full-time job, they're so wonderful. They're good people, and they feel the same way. They don't want to see our clients spend money if it doesn't need to be spent. And so inspections are going to look very different versus if you're renting your home or if you own your home. So But alas, not every professional is going to do that. So red flag number one, if you're calling around and you're calling inspectors, if they don't ask you a lot of questions, that's a red flag. That's a red flag for me. So there is a time and a place for every testing methodology, and you've heard me say this before, and based off of your objective, right, and your situation, you know, what I recommend to one person isn't necessarily going to be the same thing that I recommend to somebody else. And so find a professional that's versatile, that understands this, but that's also cognizant of your resources, because we all know that navigating environmental illnesses is so expensive sometimes, but it doesn't need to be. You just have to think before you spend. Something that we didn't do when we went through this the first time, which is why I'm working 2 jobs now. So I'd love to hear your experiences. I'd love to hear, maybe I said something that you don't agree with, and I would love to hear that too, because we have to talk. And if you have something to push back against, I want to hear it, because that's how we learn. So please support me by hitting subscribe. If you think that there was something useful in this video, please share on your platforms and get the word out there. And thanks for being here.